Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Educated Call Snap channel. How you doing? So today I want to talk about three powerful decks that I use to climb. Just decks I think are fun that aren't particularly just straight meta decks, right? A lot of times when I do my videos, it's just like meta stuff. And I do want to talk about the decks I've played, the decks I liked, that kind of thing. So I do have three decks that I've been playing, I've been liking, and just want to talk about them, kind of do like a deck breakdown of them, some replacement stuff like that. So we can definitely begin. So first deck I do want to talk about here is Lockjaw Hela. So this one is maybe like a remnant of some of the old Hela decks. I actually do like playing Hela generally, but I do think this Lockjaw shell is particularly good, particularly strong. Has a lot of pieces in there, and I'm going to talk about every single card, why it's in there, and just like the rationales for everything. So we can begin. So first cards in there, we do have Swarm, right? So Swarm's in there just because, need to make sure I center myself. Swarm's in there just because it works really well with the next card on the list, right? Colin Wing. So the synergy there just gives you two things. First of all, let your late game be pretty powerful because you're getting the swarms for like a turn 6 power play, or it lets your lockjaws be very consistent. So if you can get the swarm into a Colin Wing, it's a really nice finisher in terms of like just putting those swarms into the lockjaw lane and just letting that be free value there. So it's really nice. Also, getting 2 power or 2 energy cards is also pretty good because you do have a lot of 3-cost cards. So there's going to be a number of turns where on turn 5 you're going to play a 3 and a 2. So these do help. Let's say you don't get the synergy with either the Swarm or the Colin Wing. You can just play something like Lockjaw and the Swarm anyways on turn 5. Fish for something powerful and go from there. So it's pretty cool. Those two really work well together. Now, next up we have Lockjaw. So Lockjaw is just a pretty powerful card, honestly. It's hard to balance, in my opinion, but it does work really, really well. You get to flip anything you want into a bigger card. So we do have a lot of late game to take advantage of that. And it's just a nice tool with these swarms to just get free value. We are running a lot of big cards, Infinite, Giganto, things like that. So if you are pulling one of those can win you the lane by itself. So really nice card, just works well, really strong. Next up we have Gambit. So I think the Gambit buff really helped. It's not like the only reason I'm playing it, but I think it's meaningful. The Gambit buff is actually meaningful, and just it's now a card that can actually do a lot of damage by itself, right? So the ability to destroy a card is just a really strong effect, can swing the game. And what's really nice is that there's definitely some matchups where playing this early is really powerful. So let's say they're playing like a Patriot, they play Patriot on 3. You follow up, like, let's say you play Lockjaw on 3, they play Patriot. You follow up with Gambit, and you've won the game, basically, right? So you go first, your Gambit will destroy their Patriot, and then you pull out something big as well. Like, it's such a big tempo swing. So the power of Gambit generally can be good. It can also play it into other people's lockjaws, things like that. So there's just a lot of power in destroying a random card, even early on. Late game as well, it's more RNG, but it still works in that setting. So it's definitely something you can do. Next up, we do have Moon Knight. So I like this deck because there's a lot of ways to annoy your opponent here, right? With the Moon Knight, with the Gambit, and then the Dracula as well. They just put a lot of like uncertainty and a lot of like RNG into the game. That works well for us, I would say, comparative to our opponent. So Moon Knight, right, just removing a critical card from your opponent's hand can just really wreck them. Obviously, it can mess with you, but you are running Hela, so it's not that big of a deal to discard your card. And even though we're running Hela, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a Hela deck. There's so many games where I'm like, why the Hela doesn't do anything? It's not that important, but it is there just for like a secondary win condition. It can definitely do some work, but Moon Knight just does add a lot of particular RNG that can be hard for your opponents to play around. So I really like adding this tech. There's definitely more focused discard tools, but I just like discard tools that also mess with your opponent. So Gambit, Moonlight, those really are my type of cards. Next up we have Dracula. So Dracula is just a very nice 4-drop that can put pressure on your opponents in ways that others can't. Sometimes people will play into lanes that they think they could win, right? Like the guaranteed. And if you just drop this Dracula in those lanes, it's now they're sweating, right? Because you can hit Infinite, you can hit Giganto, you can hit Chavez as like the backup plan if you've got nothing else. But there's just a lot of big stuff that tends to be in your hand, and you can definitely take advantage of it with the Dracula. So I do like this, and there's definitely sometimes people are playing like into Storm and stuff, and they're expecting, oh, they win that lane, but Dracula, oh, now they gotta be careful. So, and you also have Hela, right? So there's ways to get into unreachable lanes, right? Sometimes people will like try to Professor X you or something like that, right? You could just drop a Dracula in there, and they're like, oh, now I don't have that certainty that I win that lane. So it's just a lot of power in that. Definitely like how it functions in this deck. So good card here. Next up, we have Jubilee. Obviously, if you're running, I'm also running Chavez. So if you're running Jubilee, Chavez, Lockjaw, it just makes sense to add this. It's just a really nice, flexible tool. Obviously, there are some times where you can whiff, but if you're having a good game, it doesn't whiff, right? Like if you've drawn Colin Wing and Swarm early, like there's no really whiffable targets at that point. So there's just a lot of power in the Jubilee when it pulls, and you can just get big lanes, Infinots, Gigantos, whatever. Even Magneto can do a lot of work. So just a good card in the decks like this. You always want to consider putting it in. Next up, we have Hela. Right here comes like the alternative win conditions. I would say like Lockjaw's the real win condition, but Hela definitely can be something else you can use to just get free power in a lane. You do only have like 3 discard tools, so it's not focused on Hela. That's something to keep in mind. Anytime you see people make Hela decks, you always think, oh, it's focused on Hela. I wouldn't say this deck is focused on Hela. It's just another tool. Like if it pulls 1 card, that's good enough, right? Depending on the card, right? If it pulls a Giganto, like that's good enough. So it's not the main win condition. If you discard Hela, I definitely have these scenarios where I discard my Hela, my opponent snaps, and I'm like, okay, like I don't care, and I'll just win the game anyways, because it's not that core, right? Where normally when you're playing Hela decks, it is. So I really like that type of function, but it is a good card here, right? Like so you discard anything, it still pulls swarms, which I didn't think that happened, but it still pulls swarms if you are discarding it through the Colin Wing. So that is something to keep in mind. But yeah, definitely a good card here. Fits the deck, just solid. You could definitely fill lanes very easily, and force the Hela to summon in a lane you want. So definitely like how it works here. Here we have Chavez just for consistency. Lockjaw decks kind of really value that in terms of making sure that you get your Colin Wing Swarm or your Lockjaw or your early game in the right lane. So Chavez just makes your deck thinner and just works well as an insurance for your Dracula. So just a lot of good synergies here. Definitely like how it performs. So big thumbs up here. And then the last 2 cards we've got, oh no, the last 3. Oh, sorry, Magneto. Magneto is quite good. Magneto is one of those cards where I always think is not that important. And then as I play with it, I'm just like, yeah, you did a lot here. And there's just so many decks that run lots of good 3s and 4s that Magneto can just mess with, where they think they're going to win a lane. You can move their bishops, you can move their Darkhawks, you can move so many little things that just mess with their calculations, make it hard to really plan around what you're going to do. So just a powerful card, good final turn 6 play, and just finding a lot of success with it. So big ups to Magneto here. And then finally we got the last 2. Now we've got Giganto and Infinite. So these are just big bombs. Another thing I really like about this deck is that it just Spider Ham you don't care about. It doesn't matter. Spider Ham away. Like hit my Magneto, whatever. Hit my Giganto, whatever. Hit my Infinite, whatever. Hit my Hela even. I don't really care. It's not that important, right? And that's something I definitely like about this deck, where they're thinking, oh, my Spider-Ham's gonna do something, and I am like, okay, my Gigantos, it goes anywhere, my Infinite's free. It's just not that powerful against this deck, so I kind of like those kind of things, right? Spider-Ham's just such a strong card, so if you can negate that effect, I'm definitely a big fan. So those are kind of the ideas of the deck. in terms of how you want to play each and every card and why they're in there. Now, there is still more to do in that you can still play, you can still swap some cards away, right? So if we go back and just kind of talk about some of the swaps. So in terms of this, right, even though I wouldn't really change anything in this deck, but obviously you have people. I made this more for Series 4, Series 5 cards, but I decided to do it for this deck because it didn't have any. And discards, you could definitely swap the discards away. Obviously, people are going to ask, why not go Invisible Woman, Modork, right? The answer for that for me is that I'm not really focused on Hela. This isn't the game plan. So that's why it's not in there. Apocalypse is definitely something valuable you can put in there. But it does open up that Spider Ham weakness that I was talking about where there isn't really in this one. So, but it is a good card, especially with Lockjaw. You can flip and trigger a lot of discards. And we only have like 3 discards, so if you want to use like a different discard, right, Sword Metal Lee Sin, want more targets, there are ways to do that. So there is a decent amount of variability in this comp, but I particularly like our original deck build. I think that one is pretty good, so I wouldn't really change it, but I did want to just show this. There are other things you can do for this particular deck. All right, next up we do have Patriot with negative tech. So this is a little bit different of a build. I will say I played against someone running something very similar. He didn't have Patriot. I mean, he didn't have negative or anything like that, but his deck was kind of built on using flooding turn 6 with Patriot. And I was like, oh, I could do that too. And I made this deck and I was like, what's the last card? And I was like, this negative fits in here. So that was like the idea here. And I actually do like how negative performs here. So we can once again talk about all the cards in here, why they're in there, and kind of the ideas for this particular deck. So first off, we do have Wasp. Obviously, if you're playing a Patriot deck, it doesn't make sense to not have Wasp. It's just free power. That can be 3, even 5 power if you are going Patriot Mystique. So that's just such a big benefit to any Patriot deck that you pretty much have to run Wasp. I would say if you're playing Patriot without Wasp, there's probably a mistake. I would say you just have to run it. Next up, we do have the Hood. So Hood is nice in 2 purposes. I want to say something critical with this deck that you have to be aware of is just the priority value. So we have a Killmonger weakness, but we can actually very much mitigate that weakness with the ability of the negative value card. So we can actually lose lanes pretty easily with Hood, with Mr. Negative. We can actually go negative value. So you can set up 1 lane to win while losing the other 2 lanes, and then the last turn flood super hard so that even if they have Killmonger, it doesn't hurt you. So that's something you can definitely focus on if you're playing into a matchup with Killmonger. You can intentionally lose 2 lanes while setting up for a big power turn 6 power spike where their Killmonger doesn't matter. So that's like our answer to Killmonger. You can actually just not let it be valuable because we can play a lot of setup cards, a lot of cards with no power and just barely contest their lanes and then pop off in the final turn. So that's kind of right here. Hood does that very well, right? The -3 is very easy to lose that lane, and you don't matter. It doesn't matter too much. You can gain so much power in the final lane that it doesn't matter, as well as the Hood being very, very relevant. Now, I want to say with that plan of losing, the one way that sometimes backfires is if you're playing Basque. So Basque is very good, and I would argue say this is the main win condition in this deck. If you are just trying to win straight up, point for point, Bass just does so much value. It's so much value. Everything it hits is just an insane card afterwards, right? You turn the -3 into a 3. You turn Iron Man into a 3 base. It's so much value to play. So it's just really something you want to be aware of. But fast games are games where you can get Killmonger because you have so much tempo. Those you have to be aware of. So if you're playing into a Killmonger deck list, you actually might not want to Basque aggressively like that, where you are giving yourself a way to get Killmonger in the final turn. So that's something, maybe this is a little bit high level, but in those matchups, you have to be careful because games where you Basque, your board is really strong. Whereas if they are playing Killmonger, you might not want to have such a strong board into that because they can wreck your so many of your cards, right? Your hood and your score girls, all that stuff. So that might be a little bit high level, but if you are trying to win and maximize your potential and you're like, ooh, this deck struggles into Killmonger, it actually doesn't. Well, it can, but it doesn't if you are aware of it and you play into that outcome. So that's just something to be aware of. And Bask is the reason why you might be struggling. You might be templing Bask, and then you're winning the lanes. You have priority, and then they Killmonger you, right? So just be aware of that. Next up, we have Squirrel Girl, right? So this just a lot of power with Patriot, and it's just a really good tempo tool in the final turns. Usually, you're not playing Squirrel Girl early. A lot of your ones you're not playing early. You can play Hood early. You're not really playing the Demon early. Wasp, you're not playing early. Basket, you're playing early. Squirrel, you're not playing early. A lot of times, you're going to be playing these turn 6. Right, final turn, you're going to be playing Squirrel Girl. Final turn, you're going to be playing Hood. That kind of thing. Where you set up on 5. You either play like your 5 drops on 5, and then you'll pop off on 6 and flood the whole board with all of your flooding cards. So it's not a card you play early, it's a card you play in the late game to dodge Killmongers, that kind of thing. If you know they don't have Killmongers, then maybe you can play it early, but if you don't know that and you want to be careful, this is the preferred game plan or piloting play. Next up, we have Angela. So we're running Angela Bishop just because they're really good cards. They also work well with some of the other synergies we have. But they are cards that start small and get really big, right? So once again, we're trying to dodge Killmongers. We're trying to be unassuming until those final turns. So Angela, Bishop, right? They start small, but then if you play into them, they just get huge. So you can just hide. You can just pretend to be weak, and then boom, be very very strong. Mysterio, once again with Bask, it's insane. 3 power on each, 9 power card for a 2-drop. Very strong. Works with Bishop really well. It's just a really good Bask target. Even without Bask, the cards itself also work with Bishop. I mean with Patriot. So those illusions, if you Bask them and then you have a Bishop, they become 5 power illusions. So you're turning this card from a 9 power into a 13 power. Like we're not even talking about Mystique. So like this thing gets super stupidly strong. Honestly, you could argue like this is not fair. But yeah, I mean it's a really good card with the synergies. It's so strong in this deck. So you definitely want to keep that in mind when you're playing. Mystique, this has 2 folds, right? It can work with Patriot if you're doing the regular Patriot plan, or it does work with your other 5 drops. So you have Iron Man, you have Blue Marvel. It also works very well with those. So if you set up on 5, you play Blue Marvel on 5. Turn 6, you can go Mystique, Mysterio, Squirrel Girl, Wasp, something like that, right? Like that's so much power on the final turn to just flood a lane, get you out of there. Unassuming, so many games, it just feels like, oh, I have nothing on I just set up a Blue Marvel turn 5, turn 6 my board is full, I have everything, and I had no power, they can't Killmonger me, right? It's just a really powerful way of playing out the turns. Obviously, if the opponent has wave, right, that's a whole different game plan, then you have to play into that. So you kind of have to play your stuff early, and your late game is like maybe just Blue Marvel and Iron Man, that kind of thing. So obviously there are different matchups where you have to play differently, but like in terms of they don't have any way to interact in a positive way, you can definitely just destroy them in the final turns. Mystique does that very well. It gives you a lot of flexibility. Bishop, once again, we've talked about a lot of the synergies, right? Bishop just does that very well. It's a very powerful scaling card that can just give you low power at the beginning, but as you start playing more and more cards, boom, this becomes 6, 7, 8 power and just very, very strong. So big ups there. Next up, we do have Patriot, right? This is, I would say, the other win condition of this deck, where you just have a lot of synergy with Patriot, right? There's the Demon, there's the Wasp, there's the Mysterios, and then you just have the Squirrel Girls as well. So there's just a lot of ways to get a lot of power from Patriot, and it just sets up a lot of your combos while, once again, initially starting small, right? We're trying to be unassuming, and then pop off in the final turns. Next up, we have Mr. Negative. I'm going to talk about Mr. Negative last because it's the last card I put in this deck. So I'm just going to skip it and go back to it. So next up, we have Iron Man. Once again, really good synergy with Bask, really good synergy with Mystique, and just lets you fight a lane that might be hard to win otherwise. So they think they're going to win this lane. You can just set up a Iron Man and then follow up with the Mystique or follow up with anything and just win a lane. Iron Man is just such a strong card. And then finally, last card here, we have Blue Marvel. Once again, we fill our decks a lot. We fill our lanes a lot. Like, so often you're going to have full lanes. So Blue Marvel just gives you so much value in that, just tons of power across the board. And it can be a sneaky way of winning a lane that's locked down, right? So sometimes people like to Professor X you or whatever, and you can just Blue Marvel into Mystique and give double the benefit that lockdown lane that can surprise people sometimes. So definitely good power here, definitely a solid card here. And then finally we can talk about the Mr. Negative. So I was trying to figure out what was the final card I was putting in here. It wasn't really a negative deck initially, but I was looking at my cards, I'm just like, everything is low cost, everything is small. Let's add negative in here and see if that can really do a lot of work here. And it does. So you do have to be aware of what's in your hand, right? What you want to be hitting are these two cards, these Iron Man, these Blue Marvels. Those are key. Those, like, if you haven't drawn those yet, this negative is great on 4. Now there's no way to get this out early because it's not core in this deck, right? Normally when you're playing a Mr. Negative deck, you want the negative out as early as possible because you're trying to milk it, you're trying to make it work. It's not core in this deck. This is like a supplemental piece, so it's not built around. But if you don't have Iron Man in your hand already, if you don't have Blue Marvel in your hand already, if you top deck, if you get the Iron Man in the last turn 5, turn 6, that's so much value. Get the Blue Marvel, it's also a ton of value. So that's the core thing. But there's so many other cards that are good, right? Patriot's good, Bishop's good, Mystique's good. Mysterio's kind of bad, I will say. Like, that one kind of sucks, right? Angel's decent. It's not that good, honestly, but it's okay. And the Squirrel and Bask and Hood are like very samey. This becomes a 0-1, but it's not that important. And Wasp, it doesn't really change, right? But there are some good hits, right? Like, that's the point here, right? So you could just drop this. It's some good hits, and players get scared when you play Mr. Negative. They get scared. You could definitely start mind gaming people. I definitely had that where I'm just like, yeah, I'm gonna snap here, but I can still win. Like, it's not like the deck is weak, right? So you can definitely do some power, and there's definitely just some nutty stuff, right, that just comes available because you have a negative in your deck. So it's really good. Peak, you win every peak game, stuff like that, and it's just a nice fun card to run in here. So definitely try it out, see if you like it, and you'll go from there. Now, obviously, you don't have to play Mr. Negative. This deck doesn't fully rely on negative. It doesn't. So you don't have to play negative, and we do have some alternatives if you don't want to play negative. This is more a Patriot list that wants to just get strong in the final turns, but negative I thought was a really nice piece in there. But of course, if you don't want to do that, you just want to have other things, there are definitely tons of other cards you can play. Shang-Chi is pretty common. Then you have a plethora of like turn 4 alternatives. Iron Lad, you can hit the Blue Marvel, you can hit the Iron Man. Super Scroll is just a nice Patriot count if you're playing into lots of Patriot decks, lots of ongoing decks. Super Scroll just does a lot of work. Khazar, don't really love, honestly, right now. I feel like it's fallen off. Maybe it could be a 4-5 or whatever, but like it's something you can do since we are running 1-drops, and we still do have the Blue Marvel Khazar combo. And then for turn 6s, if you just want some 6s, because right now we don't have any 6s at all, you can play either Dr. Doom, Ultron, Onslaught. They all work. They all can do different things, so you can definitely replace Mr. Negative for any of these if you like them better. But I just wanted to showcase my particular deck list where I'm using the negative, and I kind of like how it works. So feel free to experiment, see what you like, but this is currently my version of the deck. And then the last deck we do have is something I always play, I always seem to fall back to. Yes, that's right. It's Darkhawk Dino, baby. But we do have different tech counters now. I did have a gameplay video earlier, maybe like a week or two ago, about this particular deck. This deck has changed a little bit. I would say we're not running Cosmo as right now because I do think there's more ways to take advantage of Enchantress. However, Cosmo is still good. Shadow King, and there's obviously when it comes to replacements, we can talk about a lot of the replacements, but it's the basic Darkhawk Dino shell. We add the Nick Fury with the buff, and then we have the Shadow King. I think has been a really good addition to just deal with a lot of those kitty bounce decks that have been plaguing the meta. And then Enchantress is also just an addition to a lot of the ongoing that's starting to crop up, right? People are starting to play more Patriot. People are starting to play more ongoings. And Iron Man and stuff are just always in the meta. So you do get value at Enchantress now, where it used to not be possible. And the nice thing about Enchantress is that people don't expect it still. Like, it's just not very common that you're just assuming that someone has a Enchantress. So you can get those big cube wins with an Enchantress play, right? They think they've won the lanes. They think they set up the Patriot perfectly. Me, and then you hit them with the Enchantress, and definitely does a ton there. So we can definitely talk about the cards in particular and what they do. Blah 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 blah. Anyways, first off, we do have Spider. Whoopsie, we do have Spider Ham. Right, so this card is just good. I would say a little too good, honestly. The problem I have with this card is that there are just cards you can't really play because of it. Like death, if you're planning to play a death game, it destroys death, right? If you're trying to play Apocalypse game, it destroys Apocalypse. You're trying to play like even Galactus, if that's your main win the condition, well, good, get halved. But it does mess with Galactus decks if they are trying to win only through Galactus. So it ruins some deck lists, and I don't know how you would change that to make it balanced, right? You would have to change something of it, like maybe the power or maybe the cost, right, to make it balanced. But right now, it gives you information. It ruins deck lists. It's just a cheap card to play, very flexible. So if you can run Spider Ham, it's definitely a great card to put in your deck. Next up, we have Zabu. Obviously, if you're playing Darkhawk, you gotta play Zabu. Like it doesn't make sense unless you're playing like a negative Darkhawk or something that doesn't rely on playing Darkhawk late game early or anything like that. You just need Zabu. It's just so core, and it allows you to play Rock Slide. It allows you to play anything, any counter text. It allows you to play Shang-Chi, Enchantress, all those cards. It's just so core. This card is your win condition. It's the most important card in your deck. If you don't get Zabu on 2, the game is significantly harder, right? So this thing on 2 just like gives you so much safety, control. It gives you so much confidence. So it's just such a core card, really strong, really good. Next up, we have Jeff. So Jeff is just a really nice card, a really strong card. People are asking, even now, do I think Jeff's worth 6K tokens? Yes, I do. I thought it was months ago, but I still think it is worth now. And obviously, you can wait until September to get Jeff if you want to wait and use your Spotlight caches, but that's still a month and a half away. So if you want to just get it early, it's just a strong card, very flexible. You play in a lot of decks, and it messes with lockdown. It messes with some locations. It can just be your win condition at times. So just a really strong card, really flexible, really good. Big fan of it. Next up, we have Killmonger. I really like playing Darkhawk Dino with lots of tech. I think that's the way I like doing it, in terms of you run Darkhawk Dino as your main win condition, your win conditions, right? And then the rest of your cards can just be relegated to tech tools, right? So if you're playing into Killmonger valuable decks, you Killmonger. Shadow King, you Shadow King. Cosmo, you Cosmo. Enchantress, yeah. Shang-Chi, yeah. Any counter you want. So I definitely like doing that. Killmonger has just been a staple, and I don't run tons of ones, right? I do have the Spider Ham. I'm not running Korg, though you could put Korg in for sure, especially if you don't have Spider Ham. But I'm not running those cards, so the Killmonger does just fit in pretty cleanly and gives me some win conditions in some particular matchups. Next up, we have Shadow King. So gotta thank Paper for this, right? I played a paper deck, and he was running Shadow King, and I got to play, and I was like, "Ooh, this card is good." And yeah, I think right now it's pretty good as a standoff card. There's just some decks that just buff things, right? And Shadow King can just say, "Oh, you're buffing things, you lose." Like so, it's just really good into Bishop, really good into Anja, really good into Kitty Pride. Just a lot of different little cards. I know I just listed the whole bounce meta deck. But it's good into that. And there's other decks as well. Venom, it also is really good into. Shuri decks is also really good into. So there are other lists that it can just work really well. So I've just been like adding it in. Obviously, it's very meta dependent. The whole tech counters are just meta dependent. You have to keep your hand on the pulse. Just make sure you're adjusting your deck with the tech cards that make sense in the meta at the moment, right? So Shadow King for sure right now. A Darkhawk, obviously, big staple. Isn't this a beauty, by the way? Just, yeah, isn't this just a really cool card? But yeah, Darkhawk, just a beautiful, lovely card here. Lot of strength, a lot of power. Just does what you want it to do. And it's really good into matchups, some matchups. You do have to be careful not to make it Shang-Chi-able. The way it currently works, if you play it on turn 4, I believe, it'll be 10 power, and then it'll go down to 8 power on turn 5. So you can't Shang-Chi it if you play on turn 4. So that's really cool, unless you rock slide, right? So, but if you're not rock sliding or anything like that, you can definitely squeeze it in to make it dodge Shang-Chi, which I think is interesting use of it. It's not like super. I mean, sometimes it's relevant, but it's not like always relevant. But it is something pretty cool you can do. So you definitely keep that in mind. And pretty cool card. Always a big favorite of mine. I like it as well. Shang-Chi, of course, the meta revolves around Shang-Chi. I would say that's pretty true. The meta revolves around Shang-Chi. It controls the decks you play and the decks you don't play and stuff like that. Yeah, it's just a really powerful tech tool. Things have 9, they die. And I don't need to talk all that much about Shang-Chi. It's just a staple, I would say, in most decks that are playing counter tools. It's the, I would say, number 1 counter tool to run if you are going to pick one. Moon Girl. So Moon Girl is just a nice card to play. I just like what it can do. So it just gives you some options that other other card generation cards can't do. You can go double Moon Girl. You can go double Rock Slide. You can go double Darkhawk, that kind of thing. Those things can do a lot of damage for you. And it's just a really nice little end game tool to give you a lot of consistency. And it just works into a lot of your late games and what you want to do. And then next up we have Enchantress. So this is kind of a new tech because a lot of people are playing more Enchantress weak decks, mostly because Enchantress isn't that popular. But you can take advantage of it with a deck like this. You can say, "Oh, you're weak to Enchantress. Let me put it in," right? And that's the power of this type of deck. That's why I've played Darkhawk decks the most, because they have the most ability to tech, and I really like that tech aspect of playing the game, deck building, where you're like, okay, people are playing this because of a streamer is promoting this deck. Well, here's my Enchantress sucker, get wrecked. You know, like. But yeah, I mean, you can definitely switch the text based on what you're seeing. But Enchantress right now is doing really well, so definitely like it here. Try it out, see how it works for you, and feel free to switch the tech cards if you think there's better tech tools. Cosmo, I was running Cosmo, I'm not running it anymore, but you could definitely play Cosmo if you like. And then here we have Nick Fury. I think the buff did good for it, right? Making the 4 cost means that with Quinjet you can play 2. I'm not running Quinjet, you can if you want to, but I'm not particular, but I just use it. I don't really play the 6 drops. I just kind of use it to buff my Dino while having 5 power base where Moongirl has 4 power base. So that's kind of how I use it. But there are some games. There are definitely some games where the 6 drops are way better, and I'm just like, oh, okay, here we go, 6 drops galore, right? Like I had a game where the null was like 70 power, and I was like, whoa. Okay, let me be. I still lost that game. Why am I suggesting this? I still lost that game, but I had like it gave me a null to Noah 70 power. I was like, oh, okay, I'll play that. But yeah, I mean that kind of stuff you can get with Nick Fury, right? And it adds a level of mystery, of uncounterability into your late game play. So definitely a cool card to play, and seems good to me. Next up, we do have the Rock Slide. Of course, if you're playing Darkhawk, you're playing Rock Slide. It just works well together. They make a ton of sense. It's hard to recommend a Darkhawk deck if you don't have Rock Slide. It's hard to recommend Rock Slide deck if you don't have Darkhawk. They just are two. They're one card masquerading as two. They have a secret relationship that everyone knows about, but no one's really talking about it to them in their face. But we all know they're together. All right, let's move on. And then we have, finally, I believe, last card, we have Devil Dinosaur. You can see all my cards in this deck is inked. I've played this deck a lot. But yeah, Dino is just really good right now with the setup of the Nick Fury, with the setup of the Moon Girl. You just have a lot of ways to make it big. And it's a nice final turn play. You play Dino on 5, and then you can play Nick Fury plus something like Darkhawk or Rock Slide on 6, and it just gives you that lots of power, lots of plays, really good, strong tempo deck that gives you a lot. So it just ends up being your 6-drop a lot of the time as well. So it's just a good card, lots of flexibility, just strong. So big ups to that. And we're back at the beginning. But yeah, those are the particular 3 decks that we do have. In terms of adjustments for this deck, there's actually quite a lot here. So first of all, you can definitely just run alternatives to Spider-Ham, alternatives to Jeff, right? People aren't going to have those. Those are expensive. So you can definitely run Core, Collector, Sentinel, Maria Hill, Quinjet. Those are some alternatives here. I'd probably lean Core first, and then depending on the others, those ones are up to you. So if you don't have Jeff, obviously, that's like the most common question. I don't have Jeff. Well, these are some of the things you can put. You could also put Lizard in. I guess I could have put Lizard in there, but I didn't. So I'll just say it out loud. But I wouldn't say Lizard is like that popular right now. So, but you are running Enchantress. Oh, I also forgot to switch the art. Right, you can see it says Enchantress Shadow King because that's the next one. Yeah. Forgot to switch the art there. Whoopsie. Well, whatever. For Enchantress, for Shadow King, there are definitely a lot of tech tools you can put, right? So Cosmo, Agent Coulson, White Queen, right? Those are some early game 3 cost, 4 costs that you can definitely use. Agent Coulson's very popular, I would say, in terms of maybe Moon Girl. You could switch Moon Girl instead of for Agent Coulson if you want. I like Moon Girl because of the way that the ability to double the Dino and play 2 Dinos. I also like Moon Girl because it gives you more. A lot of times I'm playing these cards turn 6, right? So if I'm playing Agent Coulson turn 6, yeah, it's still 4 power. But let's say I have 3 cards in my hand, it goes to 6. Where with 3 cards in my hand, it goes to 5. So that's kind of the idea why I like Moon Girl a little bit better. Obviously, you can't play Moon Girl on 3 unless you have the Zabu. But once again, Zabu is so critical in this deck. So if you're not having Zabu, you have to be a little bit more apprehensive at how aggressive you're snapping and things like that. So. But yeah, those are some of the alternatives there. Then for the late game, if you want more late game, I really don't feel like you need more late game with Nick Fury and Dino. But if you do want it, you can definitely run Dr. Doom, Sarah, She-Hulk, Chavez. Those kind of things do all work. They have their own win conditions, right? If you're running She-Hulk, you need Moon Girl, so you can't really take Moon Girl out for that. But the others you can do. Sarah allows you for a little bit more flexibility, especially with Zabu. You can really flood the board. Dr. Doom is just a final turn, lets you hit unreachable locations, because the little weakness of this deck is like only Jeff can hit unreachable location, where sometimes other decks can do that pretty easily. So you have to be careful about that. And then just Chavez for consistency. So there's definitely some alternatives here in what you want to do. Also, this video went really long. I mean, I am fully talking about 3 different decks, so I can understand that. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about the decks. I have been seeing some comments of like, oh, we never get to talk about your decks because you're always making like relevant meta videos. So I just wanted to like, hey, here are like some of my favorite decks right now that I think are strong, are a little bit unique, because I can always just talk about the meta stuff. Hey, play Kitty, like whatever. Like, it's not that relevant. So this is just a little bit of a video, just kind of showcasing some of the decks I like. I think they're pretty good, And hope you guys try them, enjoy them, and have fun with them. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves. Have a wonderful day. And yep.
Educated Colin Snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel snap. Your skills will be